Welcome y bienvenidos to this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. I am your host and guide, Justine Gonzalez, also the founder of Educator Aid Incorporated. We sponsor this podcast ourselves, and as such, I would be remiss if I didn't encourage you to check out some opportunities not only for giving back, but also for expanding your own knowledge in your leadership journey. So, the first thing I want to introduce you to is in the show notes. I need you to go there right now. And in the show notes, there are always going to be a section just for resources with any episode that we put out. Now, our team takes time to make sure that these resources are aligned to the content of each episode. We are also getting better, and I'll tell on myself as the hostess here. We are getting better about our release schedule. And one of the things that you can expect as a subscriber to this podcast and or our YouTube page, which is where you can see these interviews, I would encourage you to hit subscribe for sure on the link to our YouTube page below. But this is where we put the freebies, the resources, the articles that align with the content of the episodes, and all of the details you need for connecting with our guests on our featured voices episodes like this one here that you're about to dive into. I want to specifically draw your attention to the very first link in the resources, which is going to remain there for quite some time. I've gotten the pleasure of serving on the board of the nonprofit Educate Me Foundation for nearly 3 years. And at Educate Me Foundation Incorporated, we are a social enterprise that is determined to increase the number of men and women of color in the field of education specifically. We seek to change the education system by creating a continuum for men and women of color to grow, achieve, and succeed from high school to career. And at this point, you can check out the website, but I specifically linked there. If you could be willing to even commit to giving $5 a month through the giving campaign, it would be greatly appreciated. We have so many incredible things happening within the organization. I just wanted to put that out there first and foremost. The other thing I do want to call attention to is number one, Brad's website. So before I introduce our guest here in this featured voices episode, I want to call your attention to one other link. It's the first I'm releasing it publicly. You can also find it in the link of my Instagram, and I will be sharing across social media the entire month of May with the Dr. Shantae Barnes. She has been a past guest on our featured voices episodes, so be sure to reach back into the episodes and listen to hers if you would like to get to know her a little bit better alongside myself. Her and I have been working on something very special just for K-12 educators. So whether you are a paraprofessional, a principal, assistant principal, instructional coach, classroom teacher, PE teacher, fine arts teacher, after school coordinator, a dean of students, etc. When I say K-12 educators, I mean pretty much any position in K-12. This is the majority of the background of experiences in leadership that both myself and Dr. Barnes have served for collectively, between the two of us, around 40 years at this point. But we are also both writers, authors, etc. And Shantae happens to co-own a publishing company called Brave Brothers. And so, because of that, we wanted to put together something at very affordable price, but starting with a free webinar. You can learn more about the program that we'll have coming out, but the free webinar is June 8th, and that registration link is below. You're simply going to visit bit.ly/write your book webinar. So if you are a person in K-12 education and you've always dreamed of writing a fantastic children's book that you can even share in your own classroom or with the students you serve or your own children in your family, or say that you've had this burning concept for some type of handbook for leaders who want to lead effective professional development on student engagement or strategies that you've accumulated by teaching literacy or math, etc. The sky is the limit, but I wanted to personally invite any subscribers and listeners, etc., who we have that are in K-12 education, because this is a curated opportunity of learning just for you all. And it will be hosted by myself and Dr. Barnes. Again, we invite you to register for that webinar. The replay will be available. And you will, of course, learn more information about the actual Write Your Book program, which will be launching this fall. And hopefully, we'll have participants in the program come out by next spring with having a completed book outline as well as a drafted manuscript, if that's the learning path that you choose with us. So I wanted to put all those details out there, especially because we are our own sponsor. We do not have sponsors at this point in time. We would love to get to that place once we have the listenership and subscribership, but I would be remiss if I didn't share about our own opportunities, not only for giving back that we are aware of and that we are involved with, but also those paid opportunities for learning, the free opportunities for learning. Now, let's get to the main event of this episode. The other thing, again, I told on myself, but we are getting on track in 2023. It's been a rocky start to the year. And I've heard this from many people that time just seems to be moving really fast. It seems that post-pandemic, people are jumping back into really busy work schedules. And I want to encourage you all to continue to take time, just like you are right now listening to this, to get alone with yourself and think about, am I making decisions each day that will ultimately lend themselves to my bigger purpose and the goals for my own legacy in this life? So I want to encourage you in that, because I too have felt those same pressures, and I felt at times to be moving a million miles per hour. But I say that in transparency because our goal is to always release around the first of the month a brand new, fresh episode of a featured voices interview. That is where we come to the virtual table with one guest and we dive really, really deep with so many things about them. This interview in this particular episode is no different, and also very near and dear to my heart. So I do want to put out there that in between those times, we are going to do our best to also be releasing a weekly episode that is 15 minutes or less, our typical structure outside of the featured voices, because there are so many nuggets I'm excited to share with tools and free workshops that we'll be releasing on YouTube, specifically related to improving communications, managing your stress levels, understanding how to resolve conflict with others. Like, these are topics that are near and dear to my heart, that I hold certifications and do coaching and training and workshops around. But I am really, really excited to make these things more accessible through free learning workshops. So again, hit subscribe on our YouTube channel. Much more coming with that. And what I can commit to, please hold me accountable to it, is getting more consistent content out there with this podcast. So I just appreciate you growing with us all. I appreciate you sharing this when you find value in the episodes, and for continuing to listen, quite frankly, to not only my journey, but the journeys of others. So Brad Klausman, our guest, not only did we actually meet on the internet, we have done some IG lives. I think we've gone live one or two times on Instagram together. And I really got to know him through a lot of the content he was putting out. And this episode is near and dear to my heart because I grew up, if you do not know this about me, I grew up in a very kind of religious, kind of fundamentalist background of both the Baptist and evangelical churches in America. It definitely shaped a lot of who I was, and then also a lot of the healing work that I've put into myself over the years. So this is a very real conversation. It's a very transparent conversation. And it also, again, like any conversation we have, and any topic or question, that every episode is centered around a question, our short format episodes are, it's really to ignite further reflection on yourself. It's not for you to necessarily say, I can't stand that, or I disagree, or I agree with it. If you have those feelings, or you have those observations, or something triggers you in listening to one of our guest interviews, or in listening to an episode that I host, or maybe one of our consultants on our team hosts, it is to simply get you to examine yourself. and ask yourself, why? Ooh, why am I so much disagreeing with this person? What's underneath that? What makes me, happy that I'm resonating with this person? These topics and these conversations are to really get us living life in a compassionately curious way. I always think about how beautiful it is to be able to get to a place where, even amidst surviving traumas in my own life, I can still literally stare at the sky or go on a walk and have a childlike joy and a childlike curiosity. And I continue to take steps so that I can be in that place of, I want to always be learning and I want to always be an observer. And I don't always do a great job of that, right? I talk very candidly on all of our episodes about what might be coming up for me with different learnings. And just because I'm a practitioner in very specific subject matters and have some lived experiences and expertise in some certain areas, specifically related to self-awareness, cultural communications, etc., that doesn't mean that I am a perfect person or that I even call myself an expert. So I want to also caution us when we're doing deep learning or we feel really drawn to a path in life, we don't that doesn't mean we've like arrived at some finish line and like, oh, I've just I've refined it all. I'm perfect. It's just not a reality. And I bring that point up too because as you enter into this particular episode, especially if you are a person who grew up in a religious setting, I do want to give you a trigger warning. We talk very candidly about the church, great experiences as well as really disappointing experiences in this interview. And with any interview, when we are talking about the human condition, many of my questions are structured intentionally to actually have our guests share about some of their inner child healing and inner child work over the years. So please know that as you listen, and be advised that on with any given guest or any given topic, you might want to step away and you might feel angry or you might feel like you totally don't agree, etc. My challenge to you would be to ask yourself the question, why is what this person's saying so bothersome to me? Doesn't mean you have to agree or like our guests. Doesn't mean you have to agree with me or like me. Our goal is to simply ask questions to bring conversation into the world and help you be an observer of that and help you become an observer of your own interactions, your own communication preferences, and also how you're navigating all of these variety of human evolution topics. So without further ado, we're going to dive in. You're going to hear our intro song for the Featured Voices episode. And then we are going to dive right into our conversation with Brad Klausman. Brad, who is an ex-pastor and turned life coach, and gets very in depth about his journey of not only being molded into becoming a full-fledged minister for over 20 years, but then how he started to see toxic religion impacting his life, the life of his family, and the life of others around the world. Now he works to help people work through what happens after I might leave, fill in the blank religious tradition or a belief that I always grew up with. And just the really hard work that takes. So enjoy this conversation. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for hitting subscribe. And I hope that you check out this interview. It will be live on our YouTube channel. So click the button in the resources section. Make sure you hit subscribe to our YouTube channel. Without further ado, let's get compassionately curious together. Welcome to this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast, an Educator Aid Incorporated learning tool. We're so glad that you've joined us for this Featured Voices episode and the others that are to follow monthly. Dig in with your teams or by yourself as we sit down to the table and get to learn alongside some of the foremost thought leaders in the world in their respective professions, sectors, while also sharing deeply some of their personal lived experiences. Let's hop into this Featured Voices episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast, where once a month we spend extended time sitting, having at the virtual table, having conversations with these incredible guests from all over, all different backgrounds, all different sectors from a professional lens. I hope that you learned something valuable, and if you do us a favor, pass the love along, tag us, and share the episode. Hit subscribe on your favorite platforms. Let's dive in together. All right. I think we are recording. Welcome me, bienvenidos. I've barely spoken this morning, Brad, so I'm trying to enunciate. But welcome, listeners. Welcome if you're viewing this. You know, our extended Featured Voices episodes are launching here in 2023. So we're going to also be sharing these video versions. But in the meantime, make sure that you are subscribed and or following on your preferred platform so you can not only learn from incredible guests like the one I have sitting here with me today, but we also consistently put out 15-minute episodes. That is our typical format. We ask one very curious big question and we try to go pretty deep with it. So that way you can kind of a la carte and scroll through like, oh, that's an interesting question. Let me listen while I'm in the shower. Cool. We try to make it easy so you have ways to really continue to exercise your self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and cultural psychology muscles. But without further ado, we're going to jump in today. My guest is laughing at me, I think, because we actually connected. The way how we met was via Instagram. And so he's probably used to me doing bonkers things with my sister, like sketch comedy or my other multitude of millennial hobbies I have. But here he's laughing probably because I'm like doing this official podcast intro. Quote unquote official. So I'm going to introduce him briefly and also give him some flowers while he's here. I'm actually going to share my screen briefly because this says a lot about who my guest is. And I have a lot of admiration for you, Brad, not just because of the work you're doing right now, but especially because of what this press release that actually just came out at right before we're doing this recording of this interview. But it literally says ex-pastor Brad Klausman. Did I pronounce that accurately?
You are so close. It's like Santa Claus. It's Klausman.
Klausman. Okay. Left toxic religion behind and built a community where people can deconstruct their faith in a healthy way. And then you see a caption. I love this picture of you, Brad. It is so you. You always have your different pipes that you're smoking. But it says, when a Southern Baptist church forced Brad Klausman to choose between his job and his bisexual daughter, Brad chose his daughter and never looked back. And I will tell you all, just so listeners, you know this before I hand the mic over to Brad here. And this is actually his website. So I'm screen sharing that now if you're viewing this, if you're viewing the replay of this. But it says, I was a Christian just trying to live a moral life. But deep down, I had deep questions that I had to figure out. Now, why this is near and dear to my heart, if you've listened to some of our episodes, you know, or if you followed my journey on social media, I grew up in a very strict conservative religious home, not Southern Baptist, but Baptists. And Brad and I have bonded over that and learned more about each other through following our walks on social media. But I just want to tell you, the one thing I want to give you flowers about from what I do know of you, Brad, is that I really admire your ability to just live out loud, coming from such a very heavily programmed doctrine of don't do this. If you do this, you are damned to hell. And that is something that I, unfortunately, know very, very intimately from childhood, and have worked very hard myself to deconstruct, which you and I have talked about on your Instagram channel and throughout just, captions and comments like we do in the social media world. So without further ado, I do want to hand it over to you to do an introduction, but I always like to start with one thing I really admire about guests. And for you, I really admire your ability to just live out loud and be authentically you. And I know how difficult that is with years and years of programming in a very conservative religious tradition. So I think for many listeners today, this will perhaps resonate a lot with especially our United States listeners. So Brad, how will you introduce yourself? No.
How do I even follow that up? I mean, literally, we could just end it right there and just say, hey, that was great.
Go visit his site, sign
Oh,
up for a coaching call. No.
Okay, where to start? Hi, I'm Brad. Obviously, I've been introduced as such. Big fan of Justine's, as you can probably tell by my giggling and stuff like that. Just adore what she does and the difference she makes. As you know, that you've just been told, I grew up in a part Southern Baptist home. I was groomed at a very young age in a Christian school. Asked Jesus into my heart at 8, because that's what you do, right? 8 is the key number. And then had my calling into ministry, as they call it, at age 15. All the while knowing, even from age 8, I was going to ministry because I gave a report when I was like in 6th grade or something, and people adored me for it. And being the people pleaser, middle child, I'm in.
I forgot that about us. Listeners, bear with us in this interview. We're both middle children. Okay.
So overlooked. I just I walked the straight and narrow because I wanted to please. And there are 2 ways I got affection in my household. Either I played sports with my dad, or I did the Bible thing with my mom.
Oh, that got real deep and resonates real deep.
I know. I went inner child and all that already, right? Inner child already, right? I'll try not to go that much deeper yet. So
don't trigger us too much, Brett. No, I'm kidding.
I know I'm triggering myself. So I followed that path, and I stayed only within the Christian realm of friends and God and whatever have you. And went to Christian college, because everybody's Christian goes to Christian college. That's what you're supposed to do. Only
I myself, as a first-gen college graduate, paid out of pocket for that Christian university undergrad.
Ooh, there's a regret.
I really drank. No, it's not, but I did really drink that Kool-Aid, Brad. I really drank it.
Exactly, right? So
yeah.
I only dated and Christian girls.
Okay.
Right?
Curfew, a strict curfew.
Oh yeah, listen, no sex before marriage.
Yeah.
I made sure they were like once saved, always saved believers.
Ooh.
I mean, hard freaking core. Are we allowed to cuss on this? I don't know. I'll try to refrain myself.
You can do whatever you please.
Ooh,
and if I need to mark your episode explicit, I will, Brad.
Hey, we might get
here's the other thing to remember. The reason we wanted to call this cultural capacity, and I try to remind listeners of this, is because capacity indicates there's not this like mastery or stopping point. We're all on this journey. There's going to be some days where I'm like probably flying off the handle, irritated at some form of humanity and what our behaviors are that we're engaging in. But then other days, I might have a bigger bandwidth to be more aware of like, okay, calm yourself down. And I think that's true for all of us, if we're really honest, whether it's emotions or culture or whatever. So yeah, that's part of the reason I'm like, I have to get featured voices here, because I need people to start to also hear other stories, not only that they might resonate with and might help their healing journey and understanding who they are culturally, but to also understand the viewpoints of others. And not to make those snap judgments like, oh, well, here's an ex-pastor. What's he gonna say? So just you be you, Brad.
All right. Well, that's all I know how to be. So
exactly.
That's good. Right. So I followed the whole purity culture, right? I waited till I was, gonna get married, and I did. It took 27 years to get married. And the big running joke was Jesus was going to come back before I had sex. Like he was going to come back on the wedding night, right? And it was just
Every Christian kid who grew up in purity culture, you prayed every night, Jesus, please don't come back before I lose my virginity.
know.
Please don't come back let me have sex before you come back.
Totally. I was even on my wedding. It's like, Lord, my wedding night. It's like, Lord, please just give me 2 minutes. It's okay. Just let me do this, and then you can come back.
We laugh through the pain, listener.
Right. That's exactly right. Right. So, needless to say, my wife waited as well.
Mm-hmm.
My wife, who's really just the rock,
Mm-hmm.
went through a lot of the same tortures. So, and what Christianity, right? So, I then went to college, got my BA in biblical studies, and went to seminary and got my degree from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary,
Wow.
otherwise known as NOBS.
Did you pick up any New Orleans twang to your vernacular when you were there?
No, I ate most of the time.
You were stuffing your mouth most of the time. Okay.
Beignets, the whole bit. It's a way of life there.
It is.
No matter how much I exercised, it didn't matter. I still look like, you turn me sideways and I look like, like an Ethiopian pop.
It's like you get done eating breakfast and then it's like an hour and a half later, oh, it's lunch.
Yeah.
Bread. And then 2 hours later, oh, dinner's getting ready.
Yes. It's like you're a hobbit, right? You've got your breakfast, your 10Zs, 11Zs, all that kind of stuff. And so I went there, but it was really strange because when you're on campus there, you can hear gunfire outside the walls, right? Mm-hmm. Because New Orleans is a very violent place. Mm-hmm. Hotter than, but it's a very violent place. So okay. I got my degree there. I've always been in ministry. I was in ministry when I was getting my degree. So I spent 20 plus years as a pastor. I've been a lead pastor before when I helped start a church. Oh, no, of course, that's my dog, right? So,
that's okay.
Yeah, I know. So I'm sorry. Okay. My daughter just walked by. But so I've been a lead pastor before, but primarily I'm an executive pastor, a small group pastor, a family life pastor, all of those kinds of things, right? Yeah. With it. Started going into the evangelical churches, obviously. Some were Southern Baptists, some were, it's funny, non-denominational, or really Southern Baptists in disguise.
Yeah, that was the other types of churches that we hopped to between Baptists, were the either Evangelical Free Church of America or the non-denom, which were actually more evangelical.
Right. Exactly. Right. So I started deconstructing because I'm a life coach. So this is a long introduction, right? So I'm just
giving okay.
So I'm a life coach, and the way I became a life coach is I started deconstructing in 2003 when my partner and I had a miscarriage.
Okay.
I could not get over that. Like that rocked my world. Usually you have men that are just like, hey, just keep trying, try again. I mean, there's no sympathy or empathy for men largely in those circles in church.
Yeah, that's a great point.
But I couldn't get through that because it reframed I started questioning God. So I did what every Christian does, and they go to Christian counseling. That's always great, right? But I'm the worst patient in the world, Justine. They'll say, well, remember, scripture says this. I'll go, yeah, but scripture also says this, biatch. I mean, it's like.
So you were starting to already have that dissent of, wait a minute. Yeah. We can't just pray something away. The whole faith without works is dead. I can't just be all about the works and have no faith. I can't just be all about faith and not have action to match it up. Totally. But that is what happens, right? Because in that world, and I want you to understand, if you're listening, regardless of your religious upbringing or even inactivity with religion or institutionalized religions themselves, when you are in this world, whether it's Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Catholicism, etc. But you're in a very strict, structured, these are the rules to live by. And because of that, there's very much a lack of trust for anything that's like science related often. I'm also painting broad brush strokes. This is not every single church or every single type of believer. I'm just putting that out there that often in a more closed community and religious traditions, it is, you just need to have more faith. You just need to pray more, or you can go see this Christian counselor.
Yep.
And many times the title of Christian counselor is not because somebody actually has any credentials to provide counseling or therapeutic practices. So I just wanted to put that in there for any listeners who might be going, oh, wow, this is bizarro. I've never gone to a Christian church.
Totally.
So
That's very well
you're
explained.
going to counseling, Christian counseling.
Right. And so I graduate from Christian counseling. You
Okay.
know, I just supposedly make peace with,
like they told you you're done, like you conquered this. They've told you
actually,
that.
I told them I was done.
Oh, okay.
Because I had reached the almighty point of saying, okay,
Oh,
we're on God's control. I've got not his ways are better or greater than my ways, and it's
gotcha.
stuff, blah, 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 blah. Right.
Mhm.
So I moved on. But what it did for me is it started to break down that people pleasing mentality, right? So I started saying things that normally I wouldn't say, to where I'd be in a meeting with the other pastors, and they'd say something, and I'd go, bam, and I just reel off something off the top of my head, and they'd all look at me like, I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, that was a little harsher than
Oh no.
that
Like,
was supposed to be.
Brad's losing it.
Ooh, he's off the deep end, right? So
Having a
I
mood
started
swing today.
constructing. But the thing about being a pastor, Justine, is you can't confide in anybody,
Ooh.
right? So
There's
when you're
gotta be so much shame. Oh, there's gotta be so much shame with that though.
right, right. I mean, like literally, like I didn't agree with the way I didn't in college, but I really went the other way. I didn't agree with the way women were treated in the church. I didn't agree with the family structure.
Yep.
I feel more partners than hierarchy. So I kind of deconstructed that with myself.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't agree with, especially later on, how the LGBTQ plus community was treated,
Yep.
and the way what scripture has to say, or how scripture was even put together, or anything. And so I'm deconstructing all these things, and there are a couple things that
Hang on, listeners. Brad has a call. I'm just kidding.
I know, who it's from,
That
the person
happened in my last interview to me.
you know what, I never
like,
get calls.
decline.
I know, I never get calls, right? It's the person that helped publish
Your
my
press
press
release.
release. Right. So she's calling to tell me, hey, it's out today. And
You
I'm
could
like,
be like, I already heard about it on a podcast.
dude, Justine filled me in, right? So so needless to say, there came a breaking point, and it was coming anyways, because my partner was deconstructing even before me. Now I blew way past her when I deconstructed, but she was deconstructing and gave me the freedom to do so.
Yeah.
All right.
She didn't have
As I
no
gave her the
judgment.
freedom.
Like, hey, we have to be at the same exact levels of understanding. And I think that can happen too. I want to add that point for people to understand, because one of the overused verses I found in my own involvement in the church, even through my 20s as an adult, was this idea of being equally or unequally yoked. And that's taken as such an extreme of like, but you have to see and believe exactly how I do on this very topic and issue. And I just don't believe that that's necessary in healthy marriages, partnerships, romantic partnership. Like, I just don't think that's has to be, and in fact can actually be incredibly dangerous.
I totally agree with you.
But so you're
So
deconstructing at different rates and in
yeah,
your
she
own
started
way.
deconstructing before me, and I was fine with, because maybe I'm too easygoing, right? Because I'm just like, hey, hon, I go, you know what? I just want you to be wholly you, right? And totally you. And just, if there's something that comes up, we'll talk through it. We'll work through it.
Right.
we got this, right? So, um, so, I started deconstructing, and then at 11 years old, my beautiful, amazing, smart, intelligent, strong, passionate, um, the cause of my gray hairs on my chin, my daughter
Aw.
came out
Mm.
as a lesbian in her small group Sunday morning class. Right now, I didn't know. All right, she was 11. I didn't know that she was going to do this. It just tells you how bold and how much she pushes against the grain and pushes
Mhm.
boundaries, right? So,
Mhm.
and so people started walking up to me and going, "Hey, I just want you to know, Brad, we're praying for her. We got her. We're surrounding her, with prayer." Other people's like, "Hey, we're going to fix her," basically. And I'm
Oh,
just like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And my daughter doesn't need fixing,
right, right.
right? And so that really was a monumental shift, because I realized at that point in time that it was either my job or I guess you say it was either my church or my daughter.
In your family, essentially.
Right, exactly.
And also
Right.
that tie between exactly what you named, those pivotal points, especially even if some of the elders or your colleagues on staff at that particular church, right? Even if they knew a little bit about Brad, they would have known or had listened to a little bit about you. They would have known that pivotal point in 2003,
Uh,
whenever or what that you said you started deconstructing, but the miscarriage was earlier than that.
right.
So they would have known how precious a child's life is to you.
Mhm.
And and that shouldn't be only acceptable because, oh, well, he's lost a child before.
Right.
So
Right.
that's it's so but it's also even more bizarre when you hear stories like this in religious institutions when you know somebody's story and
Mhm.
you still are heaping down like damnation of like, but we're gonna fix your daughter, this precious literal angel baby. No, you're not fixing her. Like, that's
Yeah,
insane to me.
it's dumbfounding me, because you're right. Anybody that knows me at all knows that 100 out of 100 times I'm going to pick my daughter over anything.
Yeah,
Right. I mean, or any of my kids, right?
yeah.
So, um, so, and on top of that, my partner had posted on Facebook that she merely posted, "I stand with you," and it was response to all of the LGBTQ plus friends she had, in stand right now. She didn't say what she believed, although she doesn't believe what the church believes, but she didn't say what she believed. But we were called into the pastor's office with the executive pastor because some pastor wives saw it
Oh,
and called us in and questioned us about it, right? So
mm,
I let my partner speak, because she's powerful enough and she doesn't need me to defend her thoughts. And she's really that kind of a warrior type person. So, and I asked my lead pastor at the time. I go, "Listen, if my partner believes," I was a family life pastor at that point. "If my partner believes that it's okay, do I lose my job?" And
yeah,
his response to me was, "I don't know yet." And I knew at that time, I go, "Yeah, I'm done. I'm out.
yep,
This isn't going to work." Um, especially knowing how the elders were, as well as the fact
yeah.
that I realized I was in such a conservative church around those issues, that it wasn't going to work. That, and I started having issues with the way children were raised. I felt like it's child abuse, with how they're taught. They can't critically think, and you're basically looking at a child and going, "By the way, you're sinful. There's nothing good in you. The only good that comes into you is from Jesus, who you made die on the cross, and you have to ask him in, or else you go to hell and you'll be separated from your parents." What's a child going to do?
Have a
Right?
repeat narrative they have to deconstruct like I did, that was every day being
Yes.
terrified that I was going to be struck down by lightning because
Oh,
of, oh, I thought a bad thought. Oh, I thought a naughty word.
right.
That's I mean, you really are, because then you're also, that's a whole other thing. And I know you and I have spoken a bit about that, but then there's this whole other realm. And this is what I really get passionate about on this podcast when it comes to self-awareness of ourselves, because that's the only person we can control on earth is ourselves.
Very true.
So because of that, I'm very, very much not only into that journey for myself and my life's work, but to help other people unlock those things. Because you can think, right? You can think you're going through and go, oh no, but I don't believe like that. And I want to talk a little bit about that today, because I know there will be people that hear you, Brad, and at this point they may have turned us off.
I
Like,
know, right?
let's just be real. They may
That
have
guy's an
turned us off.
idiot.
But here's one thing I will also say, and we know this was a trend all throughout 2022, and we saw it more with election season and what have you, specifically, and really for the past few years, has been school boards, right?
Mm,
And that comes to mind because of, there's really not a lot of church and separation state still in middle America in particular, and in Southern America. It's such a part of how this country itself was established and kind of conflated. And the word was weaponized specifically against Black people, specifically now against marginalized groups over time, like women, LGBTQ, all of these different oppressed groups for different human reasons, right? But
right.
one of the things I could see people going and trying to understand and relate to is when you have been programmed to train and believe, this is a very specific question. You have been programmed your whole life to believe people who are in same-sex marriage or relationship or have that love for each other or attraction are wrong and they're going to hell. How does one come away from that? Because I work with specifically even school teams that come to mind, and they still, there are many situations where I'm consulting with superintendents because they are still getting into battles with teachers who refuse, I'm not going to call them their pronouns.
Right.
So when that is such a conditioning that is prevalent in literally tens of millions of Americans,
Mm-hmm.
how did you go through that yourself? As a person who was raised Southern Baptist, you literally went through seminary, you were part of purity culture, like you did drink the Kool-Aid too.
Oh yeah.
So how did you even rectify that within yourself? I know that's a massive question, but I just know there's got to be listeners who struggle still with that specific thing, and they're also not knowing, especially my generation and millennials, if you
Mm,
were raised in that and you never departed from it,
yeah.
you're raising your kids, a lot of them are raising their kids to still hate specifically members of the LGBTQ community, or to hate themselves because they don't want their child to quote unquote be that way, whether it's bisexual, gay, poly, etc.
Right. No,
So
that's a fabulous question. Well, I mean, one of the first things that I did, just personally, all I can tell you is what personally I did,
awesome.
uh, is I found myself a non-believing therapist
Okay.
because I didn't want there to be some sort of secret guiding underneath the process if I'm going to be open to lead me where I think
Mm-hmm.
I should go, right? And
Yep.
I did a lot of inner child work. I'm still doing a lot of inner child work. I remember at 8 years old when my dad would tuck me into bed every night, I'd witnessed him. You don't do that unless you're programmed or groomed to do that, and it's really taken hold of your mind, because I was so scared my dad was going to go to hell and I
Mm-hmm.
would never see him again.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So
I
I,
can tell you the names of the kids I first witnessed to on the playground at age 7.
yeah,
Because
exactly.
you start
Right.
to, you're trained to almost you don't know this when you're young because
Mm-hmm.
you're just scared. You're like, they don't go to church, they're gonna go to hell. Like
Yeah.
you just connecting it that way. But what you're actually being taught to do is, oh, well, I heard them say a naughty word. They must be bad. I have to save them.
Yeah.
And it's the whole superiority and white supremacy mindsets as well. So, okay, go back to what
You
you're
mix
saying.
all that in with shame and everything else, and you're golden, right? So I I guess you could say that from my understanding of Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus does not speak against the marginalized, right? Jesus' whole thing in scripture is speaking against the religious.
That's right.
And the way the religious are trying to make other people adhere to their thousands of rules that go around the 10 commandments and everything else, right? So when I heard people like hating on women for not assuming their roles
Mm-hmm.
according to the Bible, or even LGBTQ plus, or different nations or nationalities, I look and I go, that's not, if we have what Jesus said is actually all accurate. That's not what Jesus said,
That's right.
right? That's not what I interpret as love. And if you really want to get particular about it, the only unpardonable sin are people that supposedly blaspheme against the Holy Spirit, which means that they don't ask Jesus into the heart kind of mentality, or jungle hoops, right? And so you can't look at LGBT plus and what maybe Paul said, because he's an idiot and never saw Jesus, but that's a whole nother story, right?
There's also numerous ongoing theories and research that Paul himself was a gay man.
Well,
So
usually you find people that
there's
speak
also that.
against it. Yeah, usually the people that speak the hardest against it are really into it. So,
Yeah.
you know, and so I started looking at it and I went, okay, if that's so-called the only unpardonable sin, and you're going to take LGBTQ plus, or people that have different lifestyles than the traditional societal norm of what marriage is supposed to look like, okay, because it's a construct, right? So, and you're going to look at that, then you're going to be like, okay, if that's the case, then people that practice that aren't going to hell, because that's not the unpardonable sin. But then you look at Paul some more and go, okay, if you disobey your parents, you're going to hell. If you're gluttonous, you're going to hell. And so I look at all these fat pastors preaching on discipline and LGBTQ plus people going to hell and stuff like that. I look at them and go, look at you. Not because there's, okay, not that I find there's anything wrong with being overweight, okay, but you're preaching on something that in scripture itself is one of the 7 deadly sins.
Right. It's
And
the whole point out the speck of dust before you remove the plank from your own
but
eye.
you're making, I'm so treading on people's feet here. But you're I know, right? But you're making it much worse, because once again, that's not the sexual narrative or the control
Yeah.
that's desired within the church. And the church is all about power and control of social structures.
Yep.
And if you live that way, you're out. But somehow gluttony or some other things, disobeying your parents,
You turn. Well, that's maybe not as.
And at the same time, Justine, what amazes me in the last church I worked in is they will take tithe money from people that are LGBTQ plus.
Oh yeah, but they won't marry them.
But they won't marry them. They won't let them dedicate their children, and they will not let them go on mission trips
Or be in leadership roles.
or in leadership, or even a lot of volunteer spaces, right? But you get somebody that is a serial killer that has confessed and repented, and suddenly they're okay. Right? Like, okay, Jeffrey Dahmer asked Jesus into his heart right before he died, so he gets to go to heaven. But somebody that genuinely loves someone else and loves that person for who they are, and the same sex, and suddenly they're not allowed in, but a serial killer, a murderer, somebody 8 people are allowed into heaven. No thanks, I'll go to hell and play my rock and roll.
So Brad came to preach today.
I'm sorry.
Know it. No, I'm just kidding. I love it. Like, anybody who knows me well, they say, "Uh-oh, she got the Jesus finger up." But here's another question along those lines before we go to our next segment. So specifically, sexual identity. What was something that, and I think this might be helpful for listeners who are parents, or if people even, I've heard people have concerns like, well, what if? And I I actually asked a family member that because their rhetoric got very divisive during the 2020 election specifically, and just the trends that you see with the further fractioning and overt hatred and division between different, I guess, groups in the United States, specifically from a religious kind of culture wars is what you see a lot of people calling it. So because it's so conflated with political and the belief system and trying to control people and brainwash people. But one of the things that I am super curious for our listeners, and even for myself, because I've talked with my sister in depth about this, she has 3 kids, is what did you find in your own learning, in your own deconstructing? Because you're obviously you're going to love your daughter unconditionally no matter what. And I can imagine that was something that, like, right away you were already doing your unpacking and your own learning about sexual identities. What were some of the most surprising things you learned about yourself as you were learning about sexual orientation and sexual identity? Because they are 2 different things, but I won't get too nerdy with that right now. I sometimes, throw out those facts on certain episodes, but that is 2 different things. Again, look it up, listeners, if you're interested. But sexual identity as well as sexual orientation and preference, those are different things. But a lot of times people forget, again, even gender identity specifically. That's a human construct. So there's many countries actually who have always recognized a third gender or a third sex. There are religions who revere people who have multiple, like, both parts, or like that those are revealed as holy people in different cultural traditions around the world. What started to surprise you most as you were kind of diving into this? I need to understand this, and I want to deeply understand my daughter too.
Wow, that's yeah, that was
Brad's like, Justine, these aren't the questions you sent me.
woo, no, it's all good. I told
But
you.
I always tell people, organically, depending on how we introduce you and what you say, we'll just see where it takes us.
You know what? And I told you could ask me anything. So this is your fault.
But I say this too, Brad, because of your willingness to be vulnerable and to share openly. I think this can help a lot of parents who they might be feeling alone. It's not just pastors. If you're a person who's always belonged to a church and you risk losing your entire friend circle and what you deem as your support system, that's freaking scary. Like,
Sure.
what will people think, right? And at the end of the day, you hope that people choose their children.
Yeah.
We also know that that's not true. So when people are sitting up at night and questioning, do I leave the church? Or what if my child is gay? Or like, what were your biggest kind of learnings and kind of things that surprised you as you were learning more about gender identity, sexual preference, sexual orientation?
What I learned is how much I don't know. Right. I mean, I've been so secluded in a box that the more I researched from my personal life in the sense of the Bible and how much I read that I was never allowed to read because it was taboo, or it is the black hat wearing people, as they would call them.
But you were allowed to read Song of Solomon?
Yes, but Song of Solomon was only during specific times of year, and that's only during Valentine's Day.
Well,
So,
okay, you're right.
and that's only within the constant the marriage, the tradition
of actually how, okay.
So I know, right? Well, okay. So the first thing to understand was I knew that by making that step, and many people are making the step, and a lot of my clients, unfortunately, have been disowned by their parents, but I knew that it was going to be lonely. I mean, you just got to know that right off the bat. I knew that when I walked out, I was going to lose everybody but 3 people in my life.
Wow.
Like 3 friends over all those years of college and everything like that. I knew by stepping out of religion that was going to happen. And I knew that, my mom wouldn't talk to me ever again. I knew those things. Right. But because of my love for my daughter as well, and because of being authentic, there was no turning back.
Yeah, you're like, I can't preach about something or in a way that I myself don't even actually believe is how we
And
love
I
people.
always hated preaching too. It was just
Oh no,
right. Yeah. I hated it. Right.
Brad
So
tell all. I'm gonna call your publicist after this.
I
Brad just told all on an interview. I'm just kidding.
know, right? I hate it all. So I I started researching just uh, teens, um, LGBTQ plus. I started reading books from Christians about it that supported it. I started reading non-Christians that supported it. And what I really found out, and maybe this, I don't know if I've ever said this, but sometimes I wonder if there's ever a more true love than somebody that looks beyond gender and loves the human for who the human is.
Mm, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and once I started learning that, there was almost this part of me that says, I wish I had grown up with the option,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You know, um, just just the option without being tainted in a certain direction. Of course, that goes for a lot of things, right? So,
Right.
uh, so my personal say, my conversations with my daughter, watching her struggle
Yeah.
through it, the critique of others,
Mm.
but watching her bravery and watching her stick up for herself and and go head first through it all. I mean, I look and I go, man, that's someone to admire and someone I'd want to be like,
Yeah.
as well. I think she gets that from my partner. So I just, for me personally, it was an eye-opening experience to where, there's a part of me that says, hey, you know what? I need to explore my own sexuality and see where I fall too. Because with
Mm.
deconstructing,
That's right.
it takes everything in account. Your marriage, it takes whether or not I like, apple pie or pumpkin pie. It takes, you question everything about yourself because religion gets into every area of your life. And so you have to almost rewire your brain to be able to think constructively or critically think about things and break down those society, constructs that are there and get to a place to where you're like, okay, let me look at this from the outside of that box I've been put in
Yeah.
and maybe look at it through the lens of love.
Yes. Yeah.
So my partner asked me, well, okay, now that you have the moral compass of the Bible, what do you do? I go, well, my foundation is love, right? That's all I got right now. And because deconstruction is not a tearing down of things, but a growing up and through.
Mm.
So watching my daughter and learning about myself and my inner child and my own personal desires
Yeah.
was like, where do I need to grow? What is my daughter showing me in areas that I need to grow?
Right. Or
Um,
things that we have shame about.
oh
Shame is such
yeah.
a I process a lot around shame and certain tendencies and behaviors I still find myself having of thought processes of how I view something, like even to see it on TV, right? Um, whether it is sexual acts or just things that you're not exposed to, especially when you're so thick in purity culture and
Mm-hmm.
you're told you're even if it's not ever explicitly said in the way, especially in my own experiences, I think I spoke with you about this on your IG live before, but it's understood in the actions of, hey, we want you to write letters to your future husband. Oh, remember, if you kiss somebody, then
Mm,
you're taking that away from your husband. And
yeah.
meanwhile, I'm sorry, but the little boys groups weren't getting that same messaging at all. So those pieces too, like I think when you don't examine self, you miss out. And I did too for years. I missed out on not, I don't say missed out like I missed out regret. I
Mm,
missed out on really even probably connecting with others to your point of feeling like that was okay to just be myself. And everybody has such quirky nuances about who they are.
yeah.
So I just think it's interesting that that becomes such an obsessive thing. Um, yeah. So We'll go to the next segment. Thank you for answering some of these tougher questions too, because these are tough questions and these are not easy things. I will tell you, in my space of for educator aid, of working with nonprofits and businesses and schools and doing more diversity, equity, inclusion work, we have some proprietary tools where we're asking about human constructs and people's comfort level of engaging in conversation, open conversation with colleagues. And we ask about racial matters, LGBTQ matters, ethnicity matters. We ask about all the different constructs. Every time, LGBTQ matters, at least self-reported. Now, it might come out otherwise in the conversation circles, and you're there. I'm there to serve as a vessel and ask questions of people so they examine themselves more closely. But not to tell them this is the playbook. Don't say this at work. No, I'm like nobody can tell you what to do, but I can ask you questions to help build your awareness around these topics so that your colleagues, who may be silently not even sharing parts of who they are with you, can feel included in the workplace. So, right. And or students at schools can feel like they're part of the school. But one of the things that always comes up in that data, and now we've surveyed over thousands of people across different sectors, people always self-report they feel far more uncomfortable talking about LGBTQ matters than they do racial matters.
Interesting. Okay.
So yeah, I just wanted to put that in there because it's interesting how many people self-report consistently. And this has been over the past 3 years with this specific tool I have, this survey tool to measure it. And we've done a national study and validate it and everything. But here in the US, consistently, people self-report that they feel far more comfortable talking about race than they do LGBTQ matters.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
I'm a nerd. Do you see it?
Yeah, you are. That's impressive.
Well, but that's a little culture note, right? That's a little just again to show how deeply entrenched, to your point, that has become, because Christianity, or becoming a Christian nation, has so much dictated. Even if somebody's family never went to church in this country, if you've been here for hundreds of years, you've seen the narratives. So okay, so we've asked some about your cultural origin story in a couple of these questions, but I do, and I kind of, we've already gone into the segment of the frequently asked question, because I really wanted listeners to hear your heart on, how did you start that journey, in case they're facing the same type of concerns, like, holy hell, if I really admit who I think my son or daughter is to my small group, or if I even admit what I believe about LGBTQ plus community members to my small group, they'll disown me. Yeah. I won't have any friends. So I think what you said is really powerful note for everyone, because you have to understand, when you do take a leap, I know this from my own journey in life, you have to be prepared. And what I haven't been prepared for at times, I'm getting better about it, that sometimes too, many of us get to this place where I can take the leap. I can make peace with it, but I maybe don't account for the energetic bandwidth that is required actually handle the grief on the back end of it.
Yeah.
And it's that grief and loneliness part on the back end where you go, that's when you start to question yourself, I think. And you say, oh boy, what have I done? I've lost all my friends.
Totally. I mean, and that's why it took me therapy, and then just my own personal self-discovery. It took me a year before I so-called came out and said, this is where I stand.
Okay.
Because you have to be really confident and comfortable with who you are, and knowing that whatever comes, it's not going to sway you, although it will hurt and it will be painful. It's all part of that deconstruction and learning to be more you, because let's face it, people that come out of religion have trouble trusting themselves, because they've never been allowed to trust them. They don't know how to be in touch with their feelings. They don't. You've got to learn all that before you even make that jump.
Yep. Oh, so good. Okay, so this next segment is called Inner Child. And you spoke a little bit about doing a lot of inner child work. And I want to know, for little Brad, when I say little Brad, go back to when you were 10 or under.
Okay.
What is a key principle that you still find yourself living by now, that you can trace back to little you?
Ooh, so much has changed.
That's why I ask it, because
Yeah,
most
that's
of
a
our
good.
guests, right, we've had these many chapters of evolution in our lives, and we'll
Ah,
continue to, if we choose to keep learning and growing and unlearning,
okay.
relearning.
I mean, the key for me, really honestly, if I'm to look at my 10-year-old or under self, is I've never been a judgmental person. I was always loving. Like I just wanted people to get along.
Yeah,
I mean,
same.
that's I mean, I never understood why people would argue or
Yep.
hate, or fight. I just can't we all just hug and get along?
That's
I
how
mean,
I always was.
no, it's
I
that tender
still
heart,
am.
right? I mean, it's that tender heart. And I think that's also what pushes us to be pleasers,
Yeah, absolutely. And
at the
then you
same
end
time.
up compromising your own boundaries, or guess what? To your point that you just made a minute ago, we don't trust ourselves. So we
Yeah,
don't even know how to set clear boundaries. So we do keep bending over backward and continuing with that people pleasing. And
yeah,
it shows
totally.
up in other ways.
Oh, it's so mind numbing, to think about all the different pathways and everything. But yeah, instead of grooming that part of love, I feel like it was manipulated
Yeah.
in a different direction. And so my son, just to get a little personal here, my son is very much like me,
Okay.
okay, except better. Okay.
Oh,
Um, and
yeah.
so when I was raising my son, um, I would look at him and go, what are all the things I didn't get that I needed?
Mm.
And
Mm.
how do I give that to my son? And so, surprising to some, even though as a pastor, I never impressed traditionalism upon them or anything. I let them taught them how to critically think.
Good for
And if
you.
they chose to go that direction, great. If not, that's okay too.
Very good.
And so they are great critical thinkers. Now he has a heart that is gold,
Hmm.
gold, and it hurts me to see him get hurt sometimes because oh, I know how that feels, right? But they've got to walk that path.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, if I had any encouragement for any parents out there, is do your inner child work even before you have kids, or if you have kids, do it now, because it will teach you what you missed out on.
Yeah, I'm pretty open about that too. I just turned 38, and I do have a desire to have a child before 45, hopefully. um, but and I always say God willing, because I'm also open to whatever God has for my life, because at
Mhm.
the end of the day, you design your own happiness here on earth. And if you choose to look at your circumstances and not be okay with them, then you're also choosing that. I mean, or you can
Yeah.
make things happen. But I always share about this openly, because I think that that has been so powerful. And if I'm really honest, for my own healing journey, it was not really until the past year that I actually, which there I fully know there's no way you can actually be prepared to have a child. But I will say that over the past year is when I've just now started feeling like, okay, I'm more aware of myself and able to also look back honestly and go, holy hell, thank God. Thank you, God, for protecting me,
Mm.
because I would have been a terrible mother in my 20s. And I wouldn't have even known it. I probably would have thought, oh, I'm such a great Christian mom. Like, that's the thing, because it's not a bash at myself or who I was. It's just, I can at least be honest and look back and go, wow, okay, thank you, God, for giving me the time and space to get some of my shit together.
No, I totally agree because the learning curve is steep. And I remember bringing Jeremiah home from the hospital and like, so when do we take him back so we can get some rest, right? It's like this little thing's going to be with us forever. Like,
Oh,
I love him. but the sheer weight of keeping him alive is killing me.
Right.
Right.
Well, so one of little Brad's principles that I know is still very evident is you have a heart for people. It's what it sounds like. And you haven't lost that. And that is the beautiful thing that I do think I think that people have this is just my own belief. I do think people have all ways of like having a path to learning about and connecting with a higher power or with God or however you refer to that higher power or the creator. Um, and then there are people who they are atheist or agnostic, and that's okay too. However, if you have that connection with the higher power or you have that belief, my own personal belief is that there's many pathways to learning about that love. And many indigenous cultures, we look to the cycles of nature and connecting with nature, and you experience that, and that's been for thousands of years. It wasn't that, because that was one of my questions when I started deconstructing. I used to ask that actually in church a lot, and nobody could ever answer me. I'm like, so you're telling me that before Christ and before somebody published the Bible hundreds of years later, but also like weaponized it and jacked all the scrolls up from Ethiopia, but I digress. All of that, and you're telling me that if I was like me or my ancestors, the Tainos on Puerto Rico, you're telling me that I can't have a connection and or in the afterlife enjoy paradise or heaven because Christ hadn't yet been birthed and nobody had written the Bible. That was what never clicked for me of like, so you're just saying, although at least, and again, in the religious tradition that I grew up in, you're just saying then that all those people before that time period were damned to hell. That never quite added up.
Yeah.
But I say that to say I did though have very vivid experience with the Holy Spirit and Christ when I was young. And because of that, even despite the religious programming and having quite a bit of dysfunction in our home, my mother having some mental illness issues, all those things conflated and converged to have this perfect storm of, oh, I'm going to overperform. I'm going to be recognized. I'm going to be good. I'm going to be good enough, right? Because you tell you that's what you end up telling yourself. If I just do this, I'll be good enough, and it's a losing game. And so I guess I just want to encourage people to not lose heart or lose that sense of love, like you just shared about, in that you always had a purity of love. And I think that's so much of who the character of Jesus was, who the Christ was. And that to me is how I met and started to connect with God. So for everybody, it's different. And because culturally, that might not have been true at all had I been born in like Switzerland. And so then the same thing is true, right? Like, and I just randomly chose a country, but like that's the truth is then what we're then going around. It's just for people to consider who are still in very indoctrinated religious traditions. We're then living in this small little bubble when there's billions and billions of people out there. And we really think there's just this one path. That's it.
No, and you are right on with that. I mean, it's kind of arrogant if you think about it.
What supported
So
white supremacy?
yeah, totally. Right. And that's one of those things that people are like, well, I'm deconstructing, but I may stay in the church. Like I get clients that are just like, I don't know where I go. I go, that's fine. I go, I have no desire to make you go one direction or another. I've had clients that they're deconstructing that just switch denominations. I've had clients that switch and are agnostic. I have clients that are spiritual. I have clients that are atheist, whatever have you. I just want you to be able to connect with your true self,
Mm,
right? And to be you,
yeah.
right? To take what was, or to regain, or actually discover what was taken from you, like discover the real you,
Yep.
right? And so I totally agree that, I feel like humanity throughout all time has been searching and reaching for the divine.
Yeah.
And you're right, depending upon where you're born depends upon who you worship.
Yeah.
But is not a divine even more supposed to be more glorious than just pinpointed into this Bible or this manuscript or that? There's just people trying to discover the divine. So,
Mm.
you know, I agree with you on that.
And what would you say to close us out? What would you say to those who are listening who are still very devout in their
Hmm.
religious practices? Perhaps devout Catholic, go to mass multiple times a week, devout Christian, go to Wednesday night church, Sunday morning church, and Sunday night small group. What would you say though to that there? And I hope listeners you understand this is in. Oh, sorry, there's a motorcycle in my neighborhood. That's what you hear in the background. Um, that I hope many of you understand part of why Brad and I are so open and honest the way we share, because we had very similar upbringings in certain respects, specifically with religious traditions and purity culture and all these things. But that's also why we can laugh and be vulnerable about it and just be okay with sharing where we're at, because who are we really serving to try to be putting on a front or a show?
Right.
And if you're doing that, you're living your life in total guilt and shame and not embodied in who you were meant to be, actually. So I do wonder though, if there's a person who's listened all the way through and they're like, yeah, no, you guys are blasphemous. I'm still very much a member in my church. What would you say to those people? Because we do love you, and I still love listening to a lot of sermons, but as always in my life, I've always enjoyed reading all types of scriptures and all types of viewpoints. It's kind of my thing. But um what would you say to those listeners who actually find themselves right now like very irritated with Brad and Justine?
You wouldn't be the
Which is
first. It's
okay, which is
okay.
okay.
It's all right. Yeah. I mean, okay, after being in a traditional structure like that, obviously, one of the first of all, I know what it's like to be in that structure, right? So, and I'm not condemning anybody that is in any of those religious structures.
Agreed.
Um, my big thing is if you're going to be in a religious structure, then I hope that it revolves around love.
Mm,
And not the love that says, okay, I'm going to discipline you out of love or something like, I mean, like you mask love, you throw love over it,
yeah.
over this harsh reality, but love for your fellow human, love for nature, all of that. And so, once again, my goal is not to tear down the church. My goal is not to tear down any religion, but hopefully also help infuse a heart of love and compassion for humanity. And I know the Christian immediately thinks, okay, when you say that, I'm trying to get them saved, right? I mean, that's the
Right, right.
love and compassion, right? And I
Yeah,
will have a whole nother tangent about that. And
go for it, because this is like very important, because you're exactly right. It's that thought process of like, yeah, but I agree with what you're saying, Brad. And also, I think I need to save people. And this is actually what I believe Christ said and meant in the word. Um, we've both been there.
yeah, yeah, exactly. We both did that. I mean, shoot, I started a church, right? So obviously I thought it was important
Yeah.
to do right. And um true love, I know how Christians define it, but true love is not um taking away someone's free will,
Mm,
right? I mean, the Bible is very, very pointed about free will,
that's
but
right.
at the same time, predestination is more in scripture than free will, right? And so it's
Right.
almost like Christians today have taken what the Jews did back in Jesus' day and before, and the Ten Commandments, and put all other commandments around it and around those, so they wouldn't break the 10. It's almost like Christianity has taken um, a certain part of Christianity, like the love of Jesus, and put boundaries and boundaries and boundaries around it and
Yeah.
control people's lives.
Right.
Um, I always believed that if there was a God, that God was more powerful than any book or any boundaries, um, and that people would know him because he'd show up.
Mm,
And I often wonder if Christianity has lost its way with that because they're more concerned with controlling people than believing God will show up when needed.
Right.
Right. And so I would just encourage people that are in that to, hey, think outside the box, think critically, but also to love.
Yeah.
Love
And I
unconditionally.
would say the hard question too is like that I had to confront within my own journey that continues is when you have to look in the mirror and say, but do I really know myself and do I really love myself? Like all the parts of
Yeah.
who I am. And one of the things to remember, especially, I want to speak to any listener right now, if you are experiencing backlash, and I know many people have, especially in the past 3 years and surrounding the pandemic, where there's just division in families.
Right.
There's friends cutting each other out, like for
Mm-hmm.
whatever given reasons that might be politically related, religiously related, etc. But because of cultural shifts and overall, in my opinion. So, but the person who's out there going, I just don't feel good about myself, or I have shame about
All right.
that.
Lucy.
We have a doggy who wants to say
I
something.
know, right?
But
Here.
I think that I think it's really important to remember that if you find yourself in this kind of place of like, I'm not ready to go all in with all that grief that they talked about and giving all this stuff up, then again, start to move quietly and start to establish your own patterns of how you connect with yourself. I just can't tell people that enough because I think that I was actually confiding in a DEI practitioner friend a couple weeks ago. We had breakfast, and his lens is very much he does racial healing circles, and he's also training to be an elder within the Chicano tradition. So, but he was just I was talking with him at length, and we were just saying how you can't you also just like religion can't force like we can't then come out of that programming and replicate the same. Oh,
Yeah.
well, you have to deconstruct or you have to do things this way. My
Yeah.
measurement is always challenging people and going back to whether they're Christians or not, but it does happen to be Christians often, where I'm finding myself just asking a question and just saying, well, what makes you think that way? That's
Mm.
it. Just
Yeah.
and that's our tagline on this podcast is getting compassionately curious together. Because if I'm genuinely curious or I want to learn about why you think a certain way, it doesn't mean I'm agreeing with you. It doesn't mean I'm even like saying, "Oh yeah, that's godly." Like I mean, it doesn't mean anything. It just means, "Well, help me understand how you got to that way of thinking." Because it tells you a lot about where somebody's at. By myself then especially if you are a person in your deconstruction journey, it also gives you an understanding of what boundaries to set for yourself in a conversation. Because I
Right.
also know if somebody very quickly is already defensive and like, because the Bible says it, like that already tells me they maybe haven't dissected it further. And so, what's going to be my purpose in understanding and connecting with them? Or should I just change the topic in our conversation? And I only
Mm.
say that because I can still have those evangelical tendencies of wanting to convince somebody. But
Right.
but think this way. But have you thought of this? Because you still care about people and you see them, you see the harm that can be created, and we've all done it in different ways. It's part of humanity. But also, do we step back and go, when I thought that way, that was really harmful to this group of people? And
Yeah.
have we accepted that so that we can make a change and move forward? Not so that we can sit in a puddle of shame and condemn ourselves, but to actually own it and accept it. Because if we don't accept something, then psychologically, you can't actually like change. Like unless you actually accept something. That's Carl Rogers. When I accept who I am, then I can change. He was a psychiatrist. So
Yeah. That's
um
an excellent point. That was fabulous because that's a big struggle within the deconstruction community today. So that's I love that. Thank you.
can we really get honest with ourselves? So, okay, Brad, this has been amazing. Every time we talked or conversed, I'm like, I could talk to him forever. He's so I just appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you're you're traveling a lot from what you told me before,
Yeah.
back and forth with New York. Where are you based out of? Just curious.
Right now, I'm about 40 miles north of DC and
Oh,
20 west of Baltimore.
okay. Oh, you did. I think you did say that before. I couldn't
Yeah.
remember. For some reason, for a long time, I thought you were Canadian. But
Must
the
be too
truth
nice.
about that, not because I think you look the same or anything like that. I don't know if you followed the Naked Pastor,
Well,
David.
I've done an IG live
So
with him.
so I love him, but there was, for some reason, when I first started following you, I kept thinking you were also Canadian.
Well, that's funny. You know, he did the graphic for my IG pick.
Oh,
So
nice.
yeah, I adore him. I love his beard is sexy as hell. So it's
Yeah,
all good.
yeah, he's a great artist too. So those are a couple things, like resource wise. That's what I want to close out with is, are there some things, y'all, we kicked off. Brad just had a press release literally before we were recording this.
I know
But
where it is.
this
Yeah.
last segment we close out with is like unapologetically living out my purpose. And I tell people like, hey, tell people what you're working on. Tell them where to find you. Tell them what you got coming out, or how they can work with you, whatever you want to plug, do it shamelessly.
Oh, it's hard for a pastor to plug anything when he's been taught his whole life to be humble and not make it about him, right? So, but I'll do my best.
Okay.
I will do my best. You can find me primarily on IG Live at brad.lifecoach. I am a certified life coach. I help people that are deconstructing. I help people that have anxiety. And oftentimes I help people with marriage issues, which obviously is all tied into deconstructing. My website is coachingwithbrad.org. That's on the screen now, which I love. And you can go there and find my story. You can find podcasts I've been on. You can also find I have a YouTube channel where I upload majority, if not trying to upload all of my IG lives. I did over 50 of them in the first year. Everything
I'm
like that.
sorry, Brad. I just thought of something funny.
Uh-oh, what do you think
But I
of?
thought of it way too late, like an hour after we started this conversation. We should have said at the beginning, listeners, you can note that we are both a little snarky here. But we should have probably been like, hey, if you don't want to listen to this whole interview and you want to find out, just go to this link right here. I'm kidding. No, but this is powerful and compelling. And just so you know, too, when this does go live in 2023 for your featured voice episode, Brad, we will also include the links to your website,
Oh, that's
all
awesome.
that. So keep going with it
All
though.
right.
You have
Uh,
services, you have events, you have
I have events, I
you
have
have a
my
kicking
blog.
blog, by the
Um,
way.
I have a free worksheet if you go to my
I was seeing,
webpage.
I need to get that.
For anxiety worksheet. So I also am with Kelly, a friend of mine who runs Gold Bear Media. We
Okay.
have started a coaching consultants underscore BK, and
Oh,
we help new coaches
okay.
navigate everything they need to know. And
Okay.
finally,
Wonderful.
I've just accepted a board position on Tears of Eden, which helps people that are struggling with religious trauma. And
Wow.
so I'm excited to be able to help people, love people, and just know that with me, I know it sounds weird, and people say it, there's no judgment. And my IG page, I stay away from a lot of conflict, and I try to make sure it's a safe place
Yeah.
uh,
Well,
as
that's
well.
why I was drawn to your page. I learned about you maybe through my sister first.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe it was somebody else. I don't even know. But now
It was your sister.
we have multiple common connections. But this is what Brad was speaking to. He does these incredible lives. I have one on there. But these are, I mean, his guests are just incredible. I know you got to interview my hypnotherapist. I think she's gonna be
Oh,
on here.
yeah.
I
Is
love
she
Alex.
here? Because she's amazing.
She's amazing. So she will be a guest on here. She's been my hypnotherapist now going on a year. So
Wow.
yeah, she's a fascinating person. that's a plug for a different episode though, guys.
Right.
But you can learn about her, but there's a lot of different really incredible featured people that Brad has here.
I
Yeah,
also want to
man.
point out that if you ever have a question or anything, that feel free to DM me on my IG.
Okay.
If you need to set up a personal call, 30-minute personal call where you just say, hey, I want to ask if it's even an option. You can go to my website and do that, or DM me.
Okay.
And once again, safe space.
Yeah.
I interview people because I believe that stories heal.
Yeah.
And I believe that people that tell the stories, that they heal a little bit whenever they tell their story. And I believe that people that listen to those stories go, oh, I'm not alone.
I agree.
Well, I
Yeah,
understand. So,
actually, that's been integral, I can say, on the past 5 years specifically, with the amount of audiobooks and podcasts, but podcasts in particular. I've actually had a lot of realizations because I was able to hear myself in stories and go, oh, I'm not a freaking weirdo. There are other people who have been through
yes.
some of these things.
Yes.
Whatever those things are that you're
Right.
rectifying in your life and in your worlds. But Brad, it has been an absolute pleasure as always. Again, when this goes live, we just encourage you to watch, share, and follow on your favorite platforms. And that will be 2023 here. We're almost into 2023, but you guys will hear from just some incredible people like Brad. And Brad, I can't thank you enough for your time. I know I kept battering you with questions.
No, I appreciate it. And once again, it's an honor to be on here and be able to talk to you.
Thank you. And thank you, listeners. Drop us any comments that you have or questions, maybe, or make sure you go over and follow Brad on his networks or even book a call. Download the free worksheet he has. So we will be right here for you next time you come to listen. Make sure you share if you found value, and let's continue to get compassionately curious together. Take care. Thank you so much for showing up for yourself today and also tuning in to this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. We couldn't do this show without the help and support of listeners and viewers in 2023 when we will add our extended episodes to our YouTube channel. So please search Educator Aid on YouTube and subscribe now. We are in the process of officially launching that channel. Haven't been utilizing it for a number of years, and we're excited. We're excited to have you join in on these powerful conversations where we are going to be having some extended episodes, and you get to sit down and tune in and learn from some incredible thought leaders. So again, thank you for your commitment to yourself and your own personal learning as well as professional development journey. I thank you for being here, and let's continue to get compassionately curious together. Take care.